Incredibles 3 just got announced at the D23 event this past week or so, at least at the time of recording. The original Incredibles movie from 2004 is my all-time favorite Pixar movie. From the visuals to the soundtrack, which I probably can't play on YouTube, to the story, I can rewatch this movie and 60% of the time, I will have a great time every time.
That doesn't make sense.
To celebrate the announcement of the third Incredibles movie, I decided to try to adapt one of the earlier scenes from the first movie into a comic book, because why not? For practice, I decided to draw some of the characters using the movie images as a reference, as you'll see on screen. And for those new to my channel, I've been using the past 4 months or so as a means to improve my art by attempting fun challenges that I set for myself. Whether it be remastering Avatar or converting Sky High into a comic, I want to journey in both animation and digital art and further my skills. I know I have a long way to go, but I hope you stick around as I record my journey. That being said, the scene I chose for this video is the one where Bob goes a little bit too nuts.
Now you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
And since I also work in that corporate lifestyle, I can see where Bob's frustrations are coming from, although I don't necessarily agree with his actions near the end. Before we get started, please leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more, and most importantly, I really hope you enjoy this video. This comic that I was creating was going to be around 14 pages long. This meant going from Bob's desk all the way to Mr. Huff getting thrown through the walls of his office in a little over a dozen pages. I first started out with rough sketches, and normally I would make these sketches very rough, as the name implies. But I learned from my Sky High comic video that that's not the smartest idea. I wanted to add as much detail as I can to each page because in my Sky High one, my rough sketches were a bit too rough and I ended up having to do the inking over 2 or 3 times till I was completely satisfied. The office building is also pretty bare, so I did have some struggles adding details in the background, but as I mentioned before, I still have a long way to go before I'm completely satisfied and confident in all aspects of my artwork. This rough sketching is going pretty smoothly, as you can see here. I honestly expected to run into more trouble, but so far everything is going according to plan. I did try to mix up the panels so that every page isn't the same format, and I think although some panels are relatively basic, others later down the line do add some much needed variety. Before starting this comic idea project thing, I thought I would struggle the most with Bob's manager, Mr. Huff. He has so many features on his face that I for sure expected this to be quite the annoying process. Turns out, I absolutely loved drawing this short-tempered, loud-mouthed middle manager. He has such expressive emotions, as you'll see in this video, and it really let me practice drawing expressions. In this page, I did my best to give him a composed look with relatively clean lines. I mainly did this so I can contrast the look he gives on the next page, which is, well, less composed. Moving past this sketch of a disinterested looking Bob, I really wanted to make sure I got the bottom panel done correctly. I also didn't want to make every panel of this comic book just like the movie, so I changed things up and zoomed up real close to Mr. Huff's eyes to really show how
Not happy.
he was. Progressing through this sketching or outlining process, I started to feel a lot more confident with the whole comic. These sketches really let me loosen up and kind of get in the groove of things. It's fun working on the size dynamic between an absolute unit like Bob and a peewee-sized man like Mr. Huff. Speaking of which, does he have a first name? Mr. Huff Incredible's name? Gilbert. Seems very fitting. Anyways, choosing a more stylized art style allows me to not have to worry too much about getting the proportions down correctly to a T. I also did find it odd how old Gil has 4 clocks on his wall, all at the same time, but I guess that's just one of his many quirks and features. Anyways, Mr. Huff has been a pleasure to draw as he's always in these fun little poses. Continuing on with the rough sketches, and this whole process was very zen. As opposed to the remastering Avatar videos I've done so far, which consists of a very tedious and sometimes frustrating process of matching one animation to another, this one was quite the opposite. Moving on to this one page, and honestly, this page is my least favorite page out of the 14 I end up doing. I don't know if it's just the angles I chose or my lack of artistic ability, or maybe just a combination of both, but I was completely unsatisfied with this one. But thankfully, I learned to have the memory of a goldfish. Thanks, Ted Lasso. I let go of the previous page and put my full attention on this page right here. I wanted to do something a little bit different, at least for the bottom panel. So far in the comic, I viewed Bob trapped in a tiny box that is either his cubicle, Gilbert's office, or even these comic panels. That's why for this decision to break free from this conversation and to do what he wants to do with his life, which is being a hero, I removed the tiny square prison to indicate Bob's freedom. Or whatever, it's actually not that deep, I just wanted a cool visual. Bob's sense of freedom was cut short due to Lil Gil threatening to fire Bob, and these different angles were quite a joy to draw. This next page is also a lot of fun as I mix it up by giving Bob the entire left side of the page to fester in his anger. I really like this imposing look I gave to Bob as he hovers around the other panels. Moving along with the sketching again, I had to do some quick resizing as I was figuring out the proportions of our characters, and we were finally nearing the end of our rough outlining journey. The page with the debris was one I was looking forward to, but one I was also dreading quite a little bit. I ended up keeping this page a bit less detailed than the others, so I didn't take too much time when I had to ink it all anyways. The final page is going to consist of this shot from the movie. It's a really nice looking frame, and I really liked looking through the holes of the wall to see Bob's ultimate face of regret. But yeah, there we have it. The outlining process is all done. As I mentioned before, I was actually really pleased with most of the pages, not counting that one page with the mugging. But overall, I think what I got on screen here does a good enough job of showing off what I wanted with the movie story and with my own drawings. It was finally time to move on ahead with the inking portion and adding in the dialogue in the actual speech bubbles. Inking is probably one of my favorite things to do in a video like this. Whereas it's nice to get a rough sketch in to get the idea from head to paper, or in this case head to Wacom tablet, it's pretty nice to get the rough and loose sketches into a neat, or neater, line work. That being said, I am a big fan of the sketchy look I did, so I still tried my best to get the line work to look, kinda messy and sketchy here and there. One thing I did was to make sure that I didn't overuse the straight line tool. I wanted that hand-drawn look to be visible throughout the whole comic. Adding the speech bubbles and the comic font really livens up the whole vibe of the page. It's finally starting to come together. Although some of the background still remained bare, I knew that this comic was a step up from what I did with the Sky High one. I'm really glad I decided to document all of these into videos, as they allow me to truly see the progress I can make. For the panel with Gilbert's "not happy" line, I really went out of my way to work on the angry expression. I used a bigger brush tool and really got loose with the inking. I added as many wrinkles as I could to really emphasize just how scrunched up his face is due to his anger, or I guess his unhappiness. It's pretty much just a back and forth between Bob and his boss man Mr. Huff as I draw or ink them in slightly different angles. There's not much to really say at this point since I'm just inking the rough sketches, so I'll just breeze through it here as we go along. Getting close-up looks of Bob's face is another area that allows me to really add heavy lines to the drawings. This page was honestly just as fun inking as it was sketching. Adding the finalized line work to this next page, and I just can't help but see Wilson Fisk, or the Kingpin from Into the Spider-Verse, when I look at Bob here. I may have made him just a tad bit too wide, but I'm trying my best, if I'm being honest. The inking is going relatively smoothly at this point, and although Mr. Huff might not be having the best time right now, I'm personally having a grand old time. The only page that gave me a lot of trouble was this one, and that's mainly due to the fact that there is an insurmountable amount of rubble and debris flying everywhere. I drew in random lines here and there to hopefully make it seem like a somewhat realistic depiction of a little man getting flung through a few office walls. On the last page, I ended up adding a shot of Mr. Huff lying down after getting flung to bring closure to the page before. I did this rough sketch off screen, I did wish I recorded it, but it's pretty straightforward. The main purpose of this page is to show Bob through various different crushed walls. This, alongside the page with Gil's eyes, has to be one of my favorite pages to draw. That's that for the inking, and it came out much better than I expected. Sure, there are areas where I'm not the most pleased, but I was actually very happy with the work I did overall. But now it was time to move on to the final and probably my least favorite bit, which is the coloring. And don't get me wrong, it's not the coloring process itself that I dislike, but I'm just not that great at choosing the right colors for specific moments. I am colorblind, so that does play a bit of a factor, but I'm also just very inexperienced when it comes to base colors and the shadows and lighting and, complementary colors and all that. Luckily, I didn't have to come up with the colors from scratch and chose my best approximation while also getting help from my non-colorblind girlfriend. Thank you so much. The next few pages went pretty smoothly with the next issue of finding out which color to choose for Mr. Huff's suit. I was very excited to add coloring to the close-up of Gilbert's eyes because adding coloring and shadows brought so much life to the page. Once the colors were mainly figured out, this process ended up going relatively smoothly. I created a palette layer with the main colors and simply used these sets of colors throughout the whole 14 pages. I used the multiply layer and the overlay layer to work on the shadows and the lighting respectively. I still don't know exactly what I'm doing when it comes to shadows and the lighting, but I'm hoping it looks somewhat passable. The gray background was another issue I had as the comic was progressing. I was contemplating if I should change it up, which I end up doing here and there, but ultimately I decided to leave them to really show how dull the office is. It was at this point that I wasn't a fan of the color choice of Mr. Incredible's skin, at least when compared to his hair, so I went back and made his skin color a bit lighter throughout the completed panels. This page is still my least favorite even with all the colors added. I did make the speech bubbles a bit bigger to cover up the blank space, and looking at it now, I wish I did the same to the blank space between Bob and Mr. Huff, as it does look like they're about to go in for a passionate kiss. This next page was fun. Adding color to this bottomless panel takes over the entire page, and it really does break from the monotony of the previous pages. I also made the background for this shot black and white, partially because I got kind of lazy at this moment, and the other part because I thought it actually looked pretty good. The rest of the page was color like normal, and I was told that the ring color I chose had a bit of a neon green going on, so don't worry, I did end up changing it off screen. Things were finally advancing like normal, but it wasn't until I added color that I realized how short Mr. Incredible's legs were. So I gave Bob limb lengthening surgery by breaking up parts of his leg and using the selection tool to make his proportions a bit less like the Kingpin. Luckily, his legs are less visible in the next couple of panels as I bring life to Mr. Huff, as he probably struggles to find his in the next upcoming moments. This next section of the comic was the one that took me the most time, as is probably expected. I quickly added the color to this random employee going about her day, before focusing on the ruptured wall with this tiny boss man being violently ejected. I first put my focus on Gilbert Huff and tried to mess around with the motion blur layer to give him a sense of speed. Then I worked on adding the color of the debris. As I add the wood-like color, I also draw in more specks and pieces of the wall to make the panel look a bit more messy. I make a hole on the wall darker as I also add the shadows to the pieces, along with some smoke caused by the rubble. There were some blank spaces, so I went on ahead and added bigger pieces of the wall closer to the bottom to fill up that space. I also changed up the smoke to add a bit more texture and shape. I then added some shadows of people in the background along with coloring the floor and other parts of the office building. Once the shadows were added to the ground, I knew that I was nearing the end of this page. The final page was my most anticipated one due to how happy I was with the inking. I started with this little box as we see Mr. Huff struggling quite a bit. The walls and the people weren't too much of an issue, and this page honestly went by really quickly. I was debating on adding another small panel on the bottom right of the page, showing Bob's reaction, but after further consideration I decided against it as I was really just happy with this final result. I did do some minor changes here and there off screen, but that's pretty much it. Here is the comic in all its glory, and I'm very surprised with how much I enjoyed this whole process, at least compared to the Sky High one. I think working with the stylized artwork that Pixar is most known for was a struggle in the beginning, especially since the proportions of Bob's face was something I wasn't used to drawing. but as I was getting into the groove of things, the rest of the video came along pretty smoothly. I'm hoping to continue this series so I can draw in the superhero parts, as that just sounds like so much fun. And I'm also just very excited for the threequel, since the original Incredibles movie is one of my favorites. I wasn't the biggest fan of the sequel that came out in 2018, as I felt that that movie just was kind of a rehash of the first one. Although I will say that the animation in that movie is just top tier and is beautiful. I'm wishing at this point that the first movie can be remade with the same animation fidelity of the second. It's never gonna happen, but man, would that be amazing. Anyways, thanks for checking out this video and for sticking to the end. For those of you that did anyways, please leave a comment down below what you thought of this video, and if you would like to see more like this one, please leave a like as well if you enjoyed, and don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with more of my videos. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.